Grizzled Survivor Show. Today we're taking a look at the U.S. Air Force Survival Manual and what it contains there, and kind of trying to see if it's a good addition to your survival collection. I'm not going to be reading out of this manual just because I don't want any copyright issues. Instead, I'm going to just be kind of showing um, some pages in it while we go over a synopsis of it. I'm going to break it down a couple chapters at a time here. The basic overview here is that the U.S. Air Force Survival Manual features a wide scope of survival knowledge. And while it's written specifically for an airman who finds themselves in a bad situation, it has many things that apply to any survival situation. So today I'm going to give a summary of the first few chapters of the book, as well as giving a view of what the book actually contains. As I mentioned before, I will not be reading anything, so I hope to not violate any copyrights, but I will be summarizing the information found in each chapter, kind of breaking it down for the common man, as well as trying to give a view of what it contains here. So the book starts by addressing elements of survival. The cover states that it will look at the elements of shelter, nutrition, navigation, evasion, equipment, and dealing with injury and illness. It puts an emphasis on survival as a mission, um, another mission for the airmen to overcome. I agree with this mindset as it gives a person like the goal of survival. Um, it has some diagrams here in the first chapter that shows it, or more the intro. It shows diagrams pointing to situations that an airman might encounter, and one of the diagrams shows health and morale as one of the issues, hunger and thirst, radioactive fallout, which is my personal favorite, climate and terrain, distance, and the enemy. It also shows the survival triangle, consisting of maintain life, maintain honor, and return. What this means to us as civilians is that we should never sacrifice our humanity in survival situations while we strive to survive and return to our safe haven. So then we get into the first chapter, and it describes the need here for physical fitness. It says that people are in good shape will often have a better chance of survival. It also stresses the need for the will to survive. Without this desire and drive to maintain your life, you will not survive. It goes on to talk about how any decision you make can determine if you survive, so that should be the factor on making decisions. It wraps up talking about the three primary elements of the survivor's mission: conditions affecting survival, the needs of the survivor, and the means of survival. So then we get into Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 talks about the conditions affecting survival. Um, the introduction of this chapter breaks down the five basic conditions that affect the survivor. It breaks them down into environmental conditions, the survivor's condition, induced conditions, time conditions, and socio-political conditions. Um, I think this is a pretty decent way to break down the survival outlook. Kind of simplifies things a little bit in terms of you can categorize these elements. It kind of keeps your brain working in an orderly fashion. And it then kind of goes on to break down these elements. So environmental conditions are pretty obvious. The book really stresses knowing one's environment, which is something I also stress on the show. As you saw when we were urban exploring, I tried to climb up to higher ground to get a good view of where we were at, without throwing my cover away. It talks about a knowledge of the climate of the area you're going to be in, the life forms, both plant life and animal life you may encounter, as well as geography of the area and terrain. Um, so then we get on to the condition of the survivor. It outlines, you might be injured, you might be ill, you might be disoriented, you might have any number of psychological conditions: stress, anxiety, loss of morale, loss of self-esteem, depression, all from not only the situation that you're in, but also maybe inflicted on you from an outside source if you were somehow captured. Um, it also takes time to talk about materials and places importance on planning for survival situations by having kits on the aircraft. Now, we're not in an aircraft, but as survivalists, we should always have a good bug out bag, and if possible, a bigger stockpile of goods either at our current location or where we plan on ending up eventually. Induced conditions kind of expands into this a little bit, as well as mentions other conditions that you might come across, such as nuclear, chemical, and biological contamination that lingers after an attack of that type. Um, Now, duration simply refers to the length of time you will survive. In today's society, if you're stranded, you could be out there from anywhere from days to weeks, maybe even months. But if civil disorder crops up and society breaks down, it could be substantially longer till you're able to, be rescued or get to a situation where you feel safe. And that kind of brings us into the last point that it covers, the socio-political details. And that basically breaks down that, like, you should try to know what's going on in the area that you're in if possible. Obviously, if you're in gang territory, as urban explorers, we need to know if we're in gang territory, if there's homeless people where we're at, if the area is being patrolled by security. And in terms of survival, you certainly would want to know what who's in an area before you go there. And it also tries to break down every encounter you're going to come across into three different categories, and these categories are friendly, hostile, or unknown. Friendly being people that you feel you can interact with. However, it does stress the importance of maintaining this friendly relationship. You don't want to anger these people that you come across. And then hostile, it says to just avoid, which is something that I also talk about on our show, that we don't want to get into a situation with a hostile person, so simply avoiding that is the best way to do it. And unknown, it just stresses caution. If you don't know the person, it's probably better to avoid them. And it does say that sometimes you'll just get a hostile reaction. So that is the first two chapters of this book, and I feel like they've done an adequate job of placing the reader into the mindset of a survivor. I feel like if the rest of the book is going to continue to be this useful, I would definitely recommend it to anyone that's interested in adding this to their collection. And that's really it for this week's examination of this manual. Now, the purpose of this was to show you whether or not the information contained within is valid or even useful. I've made every effort to adhere to fair use policies when making this video, and I will continue to do so in the future. Join me next week when we look through chapters 3 and 4, see if the information contained therein is worth your time. And if you support this type of thing, getting survival information, as well as have any interest in seeing some of this put to a practical use, please click the like button, hit share, and maybe subscribe. The more support I have, the more time I can throw into this project. So thank you so much for watching the Grizzled Survivor Show, and happy survival.